Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday. I'm Jenny Ponzuric. Thanks so much for listening to this quick conversation here, all about how to respond to parents when they ask about dyscalculia, right, in the special education world. So I'm Jenny Ponzuric. My background is in this amazing world of school psychology. We are just days away from School Psychology Appreciation Week, right? We're all very excited. Cannot wait to be appreciated next week. So I was actually just up in Northern California yesterday and I did a training on this topic right here. How are we talking about dyscalculia when a parent asks about this or when a teacher asks about this, right? Because a lot of times when we think about the special education world, we of course don't have that term specifically, right? And so a lot of times when we talk with parents, we're going to be talking about, we're going to focus on eligibility for special education. This is going to fall under specific learning disability. But it's going to be important that if a parent does specifically bring up this term, that we understand what do the parents mean by this term, right? So let's talk about it from some other perspectives. Another favorite D word would be dyslexia. Dyslexia's got a lot of different definitions that just kind of swirl out there in our world, right? You can find a lot of interesting, funny memes on social media that talk about dyslexia, but then we have some different ways that parents talk about the term, and then we have ways that many of us in the school system talk about that term. And when we think about the word dyslexia in comparison to dyscalculia, dyslexia's got a lot of information out there about it, right? Like I practice in the state of California. We have dyslexia guidelines. There's the International Dyslexia Association. There's a lot of places to kind of go to think about this term, to understand this term. Dyscalculia is not quite the same in every single state, right? Some states have specific language about this term, while other states don't yet have guidelines about all of these different terms here. So the first thing I always want to be thoughtful of anytime a parent or a teacher uses any of these terms is really to ensure that I know what they're talking about, right? So before I start responding to, am I going to test this child for dyscalculia, what do you mean by that term, right? What are you noticed? What are you concerned about? That's going to be the important thing in my mind to start the conversation with. And then again, we need to think about how are we defining that word? So I know some states have a definition for dyscalculia, right? Many states have definitions for dyslexia. Not as many states have definitions for dyscalculia. So that would be the first question I would want to know if I was like newly arrived in a district. Does our state have a definition? Does our region have our definition? Does our district already discuss this definition? Like, how are we talking about this term here? And so if that isn't something that you're aware, if there's already been a decision about which kind of definition we're using, that is definitely one of the first questions I would want to have, that answer to there. And then, of course, when we are evaluating students for a math disability, right? Whether we use a fancy term like dyscalculia, if we're talking about something specifically related to the math areas, we want to make sure that we are doing a thorough evaluation. So we want to make sure that we are looking at all the different aspects of the students' math calculation skills, likely the fluency of those math facts, as well as those problem-solving skills. So whether that's the school psychologist who's doing the academic testing, the education specialist or special education teacher, sometimes it's a combination of both, that we are obviously collecting a lot of data from our classroom teachers and report cards and work samples so that we get an idea of what's going on with the students' math skills. One of the things that always sticks in my mind when I was doing some academic testing with a high school student who had math difficulties is that her score on the standardized math test, right, that I was administering to her in the area of math problem solving was a low score. But because I was sitting across from her, watching her take this exam, right, watching her kind of walk through these different word problems, what I noticed was she knew how to do the problem. She didn't have any difficulties with understanding the steps involved. Instead, she made careless math errors. And therefore, even though she understood all the different steps, she got the answer wrong. So her score ended up being very poor. And if you just looked at it without that interpretation, without that error analysis, you would think the student needs help with understanding how to approach math word problems. And that wasn't it at all. This student just made some careless math errors, and we talked about accommodations and things like a 4-function calculator for her to have access to that just cleaned up her difficulties and those careless errors there, right? So we really want to make sure we understand exactly where is the breakdown in these math areas. And then if you are working in a state or in a school district that is also doing a lot of cognitive or processing assessment to determine any sort of learning disabilities, then of course we need to understand what are all the different things that go into math success. Right? What are all the different ways that our brains process information and learn information? What could be a helpful explanation of why the student may be struggling with these math skills, right? So making sure we have that background knowledge about, where do I want to dig deeper as a school psychologist? What do I want to make sure that my battery covers so that we're not missing anything that's really important that could be an explanation about why this student is struggling. And as I mentioned, I was just doing this training yesterday with a group of wonderful school psychologists up in Northern California. And one of the things that we had a little bit of a discussion about was in regards to executive functioning skills. That these executive skills really can, as we move up in our grade levels, help explain some of these math difficulties for our students. So we were talking about different ways to examine executive skills, right? So some of us love to give some of those one-on-one tests that look at executive functioning. Sometimes we like to give rating scales, whether they're informal or formal rating scales, just so we can gather that information because those skills are so important in our math areas, right? So similar to a lot of school districts nowadays, if someone asks a question about dyslexia, we may respond to that, right? We will look at dyslexia or dyscalculia in this evaluation. But how we talk about that in our reports, that's going to be something I have to say I'm going to talk about with my group because I'm doing a live training series. Coming up, we are starting in just less than 2 weeks. On Monday, November 13th, we're doing the first training in the series, which is about writing parent-friendly reports. And then one of the other topics that we're going to be addressing is this one that we just started this conversation on, which is how do we write about this in our reports? How do we talk about this in our IEP meetings, right? We want to be ready for any sort of questions that may come up during the meeting. So I'm going to give you some different ideas during that training about some different ways that you can write that information up, talk about it aloud in the meeting. So if this is something that might be interesting to you, if you haven't already checked out the live training series that we're doing 5 trainings across 5 months. Every training is only 2 hours in length because I know how busy everyone is. So we're going to pack those 2 hours full of content, resources, things you'll be able to go back to, and then we're doing a 30-minute Q&A so that people can get those extra questions answered after we've gone through all of the main content. So if you haven't checked out all that information, you can go over to my website, just my name, jennyponzuric.com. Right there on the front page, you'll see information about the live training series that we are doing. Yes, we do take purchase orders. That's one of the main questions we get. If you have a school district that wants to pay for your participation, yes, we do. And yes, students, we have discounts for you as well. So check out all that information. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask us questions through the website. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have about this upcoming live training series. And I hope I'm not the first, and I hope I might be the first, but not the only person to wish you Happy School Psychology Appreciation Week, right? All right. Thanks so much for listening, and I will see you guys all next time.